Good morning, everybody, and welcome. A few more people on. Thank you for joining part 2 of our Expo Readiness series for the Lehigh Valley Meet the Buyers Expo. My name is Brett Smith, and I'm chair of the steering committee for the Meet the Buyers Expo. And our goal here today is to provide some tips, whether you're already registered to attend the Meet the Buyers Expo, you're thinking about it, or you're just looking to get more into doing business with the government and or large businesses. The goal of this is to provide some information, whether you've been doing this for a while, whether you're brand new. Our goal is to, again, make sure you have the tools you need to be able to be successful. So a couple of housekeeping tips. We are going to, this is being recorded, so you will get a link to the on-demand version of this later today. You'll also get a PDF copy of the slides. Any of the links that you see in the presentation today, the links will be clickable in the PDF as well. If you do have questions, there is a Q&A box, so please feel free to submit your questions. I will have them up here on my screen. I will do my best to answer them as we go through. Otherwise, I'll make sure I get to them at the end. All right, so here we go. So first off, what is the Lehigh Valley Meet the Buyers Expo? It is a reverse trade show in the Lehigh Valley. So what that means is, typically at a trade show, the business looking to sell their products have tables, and then buyers will go and walk around. So we flip that around. So we bring in large buyers, large private businesses. We bring in government entities. We bring in, utilities. To come in, they have tables, and then you as we may have a mix on here, but then the small to medium-sized businesses will come as attendees, walk the trade show, walk the show, meet with the buyers, and hopefully develop relationships and create future opportunities. We've been doing the expo since 2013. We typically do it every other year. That's been off and on with COVID. We were planning to do it last year, but just trying to get back into doing live events took a little longer than we hoped. So now our next expo will be April 3rd, 2024. So it's the first Wednesday in April. It'll be from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. up at Lehigh University's Iacocca Hall on their mountaintop campus. And the goal of this really, again, is to develop relationships and, condense a lot of your business development efforts into one morning. So you get to have a lot of meetings with a lot of people. You get to network with other business owners like yourselves. And again, it's usually, a very valuable morning for everybody involved. For the attendees, the ticket prices are, we keep them low. It includes a continental breakfast. And then again, the whole morning of the show is $25 for individual tickets, and then $20 for if you buy multiple. So if you want to send multiple folks from your business, it would be $20 a ticket for that. There'll be a link to the Expo website for more information at the end. So the first piece, with an event like the Expo, and again, these tips that we're providing today will be usable whether you're attending the Expo or you're attending some other similar type of event as well. It's important to understand your target audience, because doing business with the government, doing business with large companies, is a lot different than doing business with your peers and in other industries. So what are some of those differences? And that'll kind of help inform the rest of our conversation for this morning. One of the main big things is gatekeeping. Certainly it's always hard to get through the door, when you're trying to make a sale. But when you're, doing business with government, large business, it's a little different. Can you even get in the door? Do you know who to talk to? Do they have any contacts listed? Or is it just sort of a generic inbox? Do they even really have a page dedicated for people looking to do business with them? So, a lot of places do. Not everybody, and it's not necessarily well developed. With the government specifically, if you're looking to try and contact, say you see an opportunity online and you want to contact the contracting officer about it, a lot of times once the proposal is listed, they're not allowed to talk to you because of federal regulations or state or local regulations as well, to prevent any kind of conflict of interest, corruption, anything like that in the bidding process. So it can be very difficult to get your foot in the door, understand what exactly somebody's looking for, understand what they even have to offer, and understand how to even do business with them in the first place. And then you also have to understand, do you even have the right buyer? A lot of companies, I can use PP&L as an example. They are attending the expo, but they've done other events similar where they have um, where they have what they call category managers. So they'll have somebody that maybe handles, landscaping. So, the tree trimming efforts that they do for the power lines. They might have, a team that handles buying, equipment. Might have somebody that handles, buying vehicles, something like that. So when you go to events or when you're reaching out, you want to make sure that you have the right person, or at least make sure you get who the right person is when you go to events like this, because, especially, government as well as large entities, there's not one person doing this. There's going to be multiple people buying different things. So you want to make sure that, you have the right buyer, or that they can at least connect you to the right one. Then there's the issue of transparency. So, you kind of have we have both sides of the transparency equation when we're talking about government and large business. Government, the one thing is it is transparent, and that every contract opportunity above a certain dollar amount has to be posted publicly, so you have to be able to see it. Additionally, every award has to be posted as well, so you can see at least what's been done, who your competition might be, what dollar amounts you're looking at, what agencies are buying. You can find all that information online, and that could be another hour webinar in itself. So, but typically it's a lot harder to find that information from your larger businesses. So they may post opportunities, but but not every company is going to be the same. You may have to be a registered supplier. You may have to, they may only post certain things, because private companies aren't required to post things like the government is. So you're going to have different luck, and trying to get that information may not always be the easiest. And especially trying to find past opportunities will be difficult as well. Another issue with transparency is that a lot of times both, large business and government will, I'll just call them buyers at this point, so I don't keep saying large business and government the whole time. Buyers will outsource to prime contractors. So you'll see, for example, let's use PP&L again. They may issue, say, $1 million landscaping contract to a large landscaping company, but then that landscaping company is going to subcontract out, a lot of the work. So the issue is trying to figure out where that information is going to be, because again, it's harder to find subcontracting opportunities unless unless you have a connection with the buyer, unless you have a connection with the prime contractor. It can be difficult to get that information. So that may be why you'll see really large contracts, but you may not see something that's maybe more in your range. Additionally, a lot, especially in government, they're moving to what they call multi-award schedules. So the federal level, that's more commonly known as the GSA schedule. Pennsylvania has co-stars, if you're familiar with that. And these are opportunities where you can bid to be a part of that opportunity, but then you're not necessarily guaranteed any money. Then essentially you're kind of competing against a limited pool of other vendors for those same products. So typically you'll see this for like office supplies, cleaning supplies, a lot more product versus service. And so it can be just difficult to figure out where every opportunity is. And so that's where, understanding that just because you see one thing online doesn't mean that that's the only opportunity that exists out there. There is a question that I'm going to answer here actually in this next slide, I think, or maybe 2 slides now. So we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, so it's just very, again, with government, there is a lot of transparency, but at the same time, it's very hard to find the information that you're looking for. And with larger businesses, it can just be difficult to find what they have. And again, to get a lot of details, just because they're not required to share as much information as the government is. Some other things to consider that might be different than what you're used to in doing business with, with your peers, is buying cycles can be different. So understanding when an entity is buying, when a buyer buys, typically one of the things we'll say is, if you sell office supplies, typically your busy period, if you're doing, if you're selling to a buyer, is going to be the last quarter of their fiscal year, because they're trying to, and they're trying to make sure they're spending money before the end of their budget. And, office supplies is again something that, they'll tend to buy a lot of during that time. If you're looking at, say, like, say you sell park benches or playground equipment, there may be a certain time, maybe, middle of winter, that they're looking to buy that stuff so it can be ready to be installed before, before the spring, before their busy season. So, understanding that, government, and also, with budget concerns and everything else, buying cycles are going to be a lot different. They're not going to necessarily buy the product all year round. They may typically buy in like one quarter with the idea that they're going to then have the product in time for when they need it. Additionally, length of contracts is also going to be something to consider as you're looking for opportunities. Typically you will have, it's not going to be like a one-time sale and then you're just going to buy it whenever they want. They may enter into a long-term contract. Could be a couple, could be 1 year, could be 5 years. It could be, it could be anywhere in between. So if you're, for example, if you're looking for, say, you're like, hey, the government needs, X service, but I'm not seeing that with any agency. It could be that maybe they've all entered into, say, 3-year contracts with, different vendors. And so you may just, you may be in year 1 of that contract. So it may not be, it may be 2 years until it comes up again. So understanding that, it's not going to be an every year thing that the same contract is going to come up necessarily. Additionally, payment terms are going to be different. And this, especially for smaller businesses, something to consider as you're getting into this field. You may have typical payment terms of net 10, net 15, net 20, but you're going to agree to payment terms in your contract. And this is going to be, again, with any buyer. So typically you're going to see, at least net 30 with government contracting for sure, and probably with private buyers as well. So it's something to make sure that yes, you'll know what the payment terms are ahead of time, but making sure you have that cash flow where if you're used to getting payment within 10 days, that you're going to have 3 times the length of time before you get that payment, especially, if it's going to be a larger contract. So again, just things to keep in mind. These are not meant to dissuade you from participating, but just understanding that doing business with these entities is going to be a little bit different. So to answer the, whoops, that was an extra step. Okay. So to answer, there was a question that was asked here. Mark it so everybody else can see the question. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay. So one of the questions that gets asked a lot, and this is one of them, is is it true that by the time an opportunity is listed, the agency already has a winner in mind? So possibly, not necessarily. So what I would argue is that if you're seeing a proposal, you're usually much later in the process, and I'll explain why you may seem, because sometimes you'll read a proposal and it's like, that seems really written for a specific company. I'll explain why that is. So here on this screen with the, this is taken from a DoD, Department of Defense, presentation about how they buy things. And typically if you're seeing a request for proposal from anybody, you're typically seeing it at this between stages 5 and 6. So they've determined how they're going to acquire this product, and they're already in the process of doing that. So what's happened is, all of this has happened ahead of time. And again, this happens with every acquisition. Even in your business, you're doing these same things. It's just, probably on a more condensed and less formal schedule. So where they're finding out who does this, who can do the opportunity, what do we want the opportunity to look like, what should the scope of work be, they're doing that analysis here in steps 2 and 3. So they're looking at what have they done in the past? Who have they done business with before? Are there any new needs that are required for this particular thing? Is this a renewal of an existing contract? Is this, they're just rebidding an existing contract? Is this something brand new? What does the actual customer need? What does the buyer need? And what have we done before? And then they're going to do their market research. So they're going to look at, has anybody done this in the government or, with this company before? What suppliers are out there? And this is where to answer the question, this is where it's important to get in and connected with them ahead of time. Because, again, if say there's already 100 vendors that can provide that product that are already registered with the government, that are already selling to the government in some way, there's not really a need for them to do a lot deeper searching. So they're not going to necessarily, even though you may do it, you may have a great, have a great website, your SEO strategy will get them where they need to go, but they're not going to necessarily find you. So that's where it's important to make sure you're making those connections and have the right marketing materials, which we are going to talk about later. So that's where, again, it's not that they've necessarily already picked a winner. They may have an idea of who is going to bid. I would say that. But, this is where the earlier you can get connected, the more you can get connected with the people making these decisions, the greater chances you're going to have that it's more designed to something that you're able to do. So I hope that answers your question. So let's see, there's a question on how for real estate developers working with government. Typically it's going to be similar. They're going to look for, there's usually, for example, GSA is going to probably be the agency that you work with the most. I'm going to So the General Services Administration for the federal government sort of buys and manages property for the government. So that's probably where you're going to find the most of that. Typically before even if they're, you might see a construction contract, the government's already acquired the land through GSA most likely. I'm sure there's a similar, the PA Department of General Services probably does the same thing. So you're going to typically look for those two agencies if you're looking from a real estate perspective. All right, so that takes care of that. So yeah, so the idea is to get in as early as possible, make sure you're meeting the right people, because if you see the proposal already issued, it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. It just means it may not be written in a way, that's, in sort of in your wheelhouse. And to take those same opportunity, to take the same things that we've talked about and targeting that towards your meetings at the Expo. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when we have our next session in March, which is going to be about the Expo Day itself. But you're going to have the opportunity to schedule one-on-one meetings with our buyers. And you'll do that, in the couple weeks prior to the Expo. So you can go to our buyers attending page, which that link will work, and that will be updated throughout leading up to the Expo. It should be up to date now. I'll send out some sort of template to help you kind of prioritize your meetings and what you want to do. But the idea later, sometime in February, we ask the buyer to submit what is it that they're looking to buy. What are they specifically looking for? Are there things they're not looking for? So that way you have as much information as possible to know to tailor. So if you're saying, oh, I really wanted to meet with this buyer, but it doesn't seem like they're buying anything, does it make sense to meet with them? And that's, then that's your call. So you'll be able to research what they're buying, be able to research, any sort of and you can then use that information with knowing who's coming, to research any active opportunities and or past contracts. And I've gotten a couple questions. Yes, there is going to be a recording for this. It will be available to you at the end of the later today. So the biggest thing to do is craft your marketing strategy. That's probably the number one thing that you can start doing right now in preparation for the Expo. Because again, we have some buyers, but we don't have everybody that's going to be attending. So doing that kind of research, you can certainly start. But the biggest thing to do is start your marketing strategy, because that's going to work. That's going to be important regardless of who you end up meeting with. And the main way to do that is through your capability statement. So again, because nothing can be the same in business. So just like how there's different rules when dealing with our buyers, in terms of trying to find opportunities and things like that, there's also special tips for marketing. Typically how you market to to smaller entities is going to be a lot different than you're going to market to government and larger buyers. So what is a capability statement? I'm going to show you some examples later on, or show where you can find examples. But basically, it's a one-page resume of your company. One page, one-sided. I should add that in there as well, and we'll talk about why. Okay. It should be, eye-catching, but not necessarily overdone. You want to make sure that it can be read in black and white. You want to make sure that if you photocopy it, it's still readable. Because again, they may scan it in and send it to a colleague. They may make copies, for their files, for their team, whatever it is. So you want to make sure that it's readable, no matter what. You want it to have, some graphic, some color, but you don't want to make it so it's not readable. Okay? There's no necessarily standard layout. There's standard things you should have in it, which we'll talk about. But there's not necessarily a standard layout that it has to be. So it's kind of like a resume where, it can look, in a couple of different ways. So see what works for you. You can look up others in your industry and see what they're doing. Typically they might have them publicly posted. And you can Google for different ideas, and I'll show you how, there'll be a link to that later. And make sure you save it in a PDF format. Just so that way it doesn't matter who's reading it, they're going to be able to open it. If you put it in Word or Publisher or something else, there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to read it. So here's an example. You can just Google capability statement. If you click this image in the when you get the slides, you'll be able to, it'll take you to this page, and you can go and search different options. Again, you can see there's some that are, this one down here on the bottom, has a lot going on for it. Probably is very hard to read when it's copied. And then you have some that are, more plain. Again, not fancy, just they're trying to convey information. So that's what we're trying to do here. So you can Google that, get some ideas of what works for you. Some include pictures, some don't, entirely up to you. So what should a capability statement include? Primarily, that should include three things. It should include statistics, who you are and what you do. And that's it. So what kind of statistics should you include? So you really just start, about your company. You should have your company name, obviously, and your address. And you should also have a point of contact as well as their phone number and email. Some tips for the point of contact. This should be a person, not a, hey, just call the company or call our sales department or call our government office, whatever it is. It should be a person, and it should be the person that's going to be sort of their day-to-day contact. It may be a salesperson, it may be, the owner, it may be, it could be whoever. But you want to make sure that is a real person that they're going to most likely be that they're going to have the most contact with. Part of that is you want to, let them know that they're not going to be bounced around. You want to know that they're going to reach a specific person when they call. So similarly, the phone number should be directly to that person. It shouldn't be just a voicemail box. It shouldn't be the generic line where they have to, go through prompts. It should be a direct line to whoever it is that the point of contact is. And same with the email. It should be a direct email. Another tip, while we normally try and look to find ways to save our clients money, at every step of the way, one investment that would be helpful, especially when you're doing government work, is having an email address that shows you at yourcompany.com versus say a Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, AOL address. You want it to be, it should be something that is person at company.com if you're able to do that. Again, there's I think there's relatively cheap ways to do that. That doesn't require a lot of, it's not like you have to have a whole separate email program. You can still have it forward to your Gmail, whatever it is. But you want to make sure, again, it's just an idea of professionalism. There's little things that, might make a contracting officer or somebody go, yeah, maybe, maybe not. So having stuff like that can just, again, reduce the opportunities for them to move on from your capability statement. Additionally, you're going to want to look up your NAICS codes. So NAICS are, I'm going to bring over a screen here to show two things. And so you have your NAICS codes, which are 6-digit codes that basically describe what it is that your company does. So for example, if we go into manufacturing and say we make, let's make cheese. So you can see here, it'll describe what it is that you might do. So again, within each one, there's a bunch of different things that you can possibly do. So if you're a cheese manufacturer, that would be your NAICS code. You can have multiple NAICS codes. Some companies have like 10 NAICS codes. Some have one. Some have somewhere in the middle. There's no right answer for NAICS codes, but you want to make sure that they're just relevant. That they're just relevant to the work that you're doing. And this will help you also searching, especially on the federal side. This will help you search for opportunities because they're categorized by NAICS code. So if you're looking for opportunities and you're going, why can't I find anything? It may be that you don't have the right NAICS code. You're looking in different NAICS codes. So look for opportunities, see what the NAICS code is. You can add that. If you're like, hey, that works, add that NAICS code to your capability statement. That can be useful. Again, more than 10 is probably not necessary unless you do a lot of very different things. Again, typically I'd say 3 to 5 is going to probably be typical. Another code that you may see are the UNSPSCs. So these are from the United Nations. That's how they do a lot of their buying. But Pennsylvania uses these codes as well. So you're going to see. So let me just see if I type in cheese, what we get. I chose to go with cheese here for everything, but let's see what we got. So if I'm making natural cheeses, that's going to be my code that I want to have on my capability statement. So some people put both NAICS and the PSCs. Some will just put NAICS. It just depends on, again, who you're marketing to. So if you're planning on primarily doing work with Pennsylvania, you're going to want to know what these codes are. If you're primarily doing work with the feds, you're going to want to know what the NAICS codes are. And again, private sector businesses might use both. So that's why, again, just be familiar with them, even if you don't list them all. So that way you have access to them. Okay. All right, so moving on from there. You're also going to want your unique entity ID if you have one. So if you're registered with the federal government, so this used to be, you're going to register in sam.gov if you haven't already. You don't need to until you're, it's recommended if you're thinking about federal contracts to do it. But if you're looking at state contracts or you're looking at private sector, you don't need to register. But unless they make it a requirement themselves. But this used to be called a cage code. So if you were doing government business a couple years ago, this was called the cage code. They've changed it to the unique entity ID. So that's going to be your ID number for the government as a contractor. PA there's the PA vendor number, which you can also include if you're going to plan to do business with Pennsylvania. So your DUNS number, again, is a sort of credit reporting code, that the federal government used to require. They don't, but your private sector entities may still require that. For certifications, you're going to want to list if you have, say, your woman-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, 8A, any of those certifications that we talked about at our last session in December. You're going to want to list those, and any professional certifications that may be relevant to the work that you're going to do. So that's going to be, for example, if you're in IT, do you need like a specific Microsoft certification or Google or Amazon? Do you need, like, if you're doing cybersecurity, do you need some sort of certification for that? So you want to make sure, again, don't list every single certification that you have, just list the ones that you think are going to be the most relevant, that are going to be the most relevant to your work. Just a couple quick notes on certifications as you're including them in your capability statement. Make sure you're only listing ones that you currently have. So if somebody asked you to, hey, pull up your certificate, that you could in theory do that. Part of that is sometimes, especially for an event like the Expo, you may say, okay, hey, I've applied for my woman-owned certification, but I don't have it. It's still in the process. I don't have it yet. You don't want to be putting it, because you don't want to imply that you already have it on your capability statement. Again, those are things that are going to, that are, not going to go over well with, with potential buyers. So make sure you're only listing those that you have. Make sure you're not using any logos from a certifying agency unless you have permission to use them. So the SBA, typically you weren't allowed to use any SBA logos. Now they've created some for their different programs that they have. So you can click that link if you have any of the SBA certifications. So 8A, HubZone, they've now taken over the veteran-owned certification, woman-owned. So you can get those there. But just make sure that you have permission to use the logos that you're using on your capability statement. And if you just registered in SAM and self-certified, so when you do go and register as a federal contractor, you can check boxes that you are, that you're a veteran, that you're disadvantaged, so on and so forth. You would just use self-certified as descriptor. So you don't want to say, if that's the only certification that you have, you don't want to say that you're certified. You just want to say you're self-certified, so they know that there is a difference between those two. Okay. All right. The who are you section should be, you want to provide sort of a brief company history, just sort of, a long paragraph, gives a little background on your company. Again, not too much more than that, because you want to be focusing more on what you currently do, not what, what you're currently doing, not giving them a whole big, page-long corporate history. And what I would argue is probably the most important section of your capability statement is your past performance. So when dealing with buyers, one of the things that they're going to really look for is past performance. So it's sort of like looking for your first job. Everybody wants you to have experience to get your first job, but you can't get that experience without your job. So it's going to be similar with government contracting. That's why it's typically very hard to get in the door in the beginning, just because, again, if you're a newer business, you don't necessarily have, the experience that they're looking for and that they think they're looking for. So what you want to do is list your top 5 to 10 projects. Or, again, if you have less than 5, list less than 5. But I wouldn't list more than 10, just because, again, you have limited space. It's only one page. And focus on, again, you want your largest, splashiest projects that you've had. And again, what that means to you is what it means to you. If you've done government work, if you've done large work, say for a prime contractor, definitely put that. If not, then that's fine. It doesn't mean it's going to hurt you. It just means, you're going to have different projects on there. So you just want to put in, who are the biggest clients that you've worked with? What are the biggest types of projects you've done? They just want to see that you can handle either complex projects or larger entities, that you're familiar with those kinds of processes. Again, it doesn't mean that you're totally out of the running if you've not done those types of projects, but that's going to be typically what they're looking for. And you want to make sure that list is evolving. So you don't want to make your capability statement today and then never touch it again. You want to make sure that as you get new projects, as you get new contracts, do new sales, that you're updating that list to make sure that it's current. It doesn't necessarily have to be always, your most recent, but just your most impressive. And then lastly, you should be listing what you do. So you want to make sure that you're listing your capabilities. I mean, that's the core part. It's in the name of the statement. But take this opportunity to differentiate yourself from your competition. So this is where do you have any sort of specialized equipment? Do you have any industry standard certifications that are necessary that your competitors may not have? Do you have any quality differentiators? So can you, for example, if you're a machine shop, can you, do you have, really high tolerances? Do you use special materials, things like that? And do you have any unique value add? Just something that makes you different. Because the one thing to remember when you're marketing to these buyers is they are very likely already buying what you sell from somebody else. So you want to make sure that they have a reason to want to do business with you in particular. So sometimes, one of the things, especially since this is a local event, obviously most of the businesses attending are going to be local. But if the fact that they could be buying a product out, they could be buying widgets out in California and having them shipped, you might be able to make that same widget and really make it end up giving them a cheaper cost, even though your per item price might be higher, but you're not paying to deliver it all the way across the country. So things like that, to start thinking about what makes you different, what makes your business better than other businesses. Okay. And there's a couple of questions. I'm going to answer one now. I will get to all of them by the end. There's a question about how to win government contracts if you don't have any prior in your business. You got to get your first one. So there is no sort of right answer to that. You can do it. We've had clients do. We have clients that do it. Typically it's going to be, again, coming to things like not just promoting the expo, but coming to things like the expo, so that you can make those connections. That's going to be I have one client in particular that I know of that sort of took our advice, started going to meet with people, set up meetings, network, and got contracts. And even though he'd been doing the job with another company for a while, ended up getting a really good, getting his first contract probably within like 6 months to a year of starting out, which is great. So it is possible. You can also start looking at local government. You can look at state government. The state government, Pennsylvania is making a larger effort to do more business with small and diverse businesses. They've always done it, but Governor Shapiro has been making that a bigger push. Local government can be a little harder just because local governments they have to go solely on price. So you can't necessarily compete on the fact that you're a small business. That doesn't get you necessarily a benefit with local government, and that's just due to state law. But the state government does, so you can start out smaller. And again, once you get that first one, it becomes a lot easier after that. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So some tips on how to design one. There's a couple ways. Again, there's options. There's both free and paid services on here. Obviously, if you don't have to pay, don't. But just some options depending on what you may already have in your business. So Canva is a new addition to this. They've been around for a few years. They have a free version of it, which should probably be enough for what it is you need to do to make a capability statement. It's very drag and drop, very user friendly. We use it for a lot of our social media, for a lot of our social media and marketing designs. And again, it's web based, so you don't have to download. You can download something, but you don't have to. So you can share it amongst your team. Microsoft Publisher is another one. Again, this one you'd have to pay for, but if you already have, depending on your version of Microsoft Office that you have, you may already have it installed. So you don't have to go and buy it if you don't have it, but you may already have it as part of your subscription. LibreOffice is an open source version of Microsoft Office. So they came out with it. It's been out for a while. And they have basically open source free versions of like Word and Excel and PowerPoint, and LibreOffice Draw is their version of Publisher. So if you don't want to buy Publisher, you can try that and see how it works. I personally have not used it, so I can't attest to how good it works. But it's certainly an option if you're not looking to spend money. And I put Adobe on here. So either Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, but I only put that on there if you already have those as part of your business. Adobe is pricey, so I don't necessarily recommend going out to buy it if you don't have it, because Canva will work just as well, Publisher will work just as well, LibreOffice will work just as well. But if you already have Adobe, if your marketing team already has Adobe, it can just be a way to, again, use something you already have, especially if you already have marketing materials built in those things. It can be easier to just make the switch over to a capability statement there. And again, if you click when you get the slides, if you click any of the icons, it'll take you right to those websites so you can check them out for yourself. Some other marketing tips to throw out there. One, make sure your website's up to date. So these are some things to do before the expo. You just make sure your information is correct. There's still some businesses that I've come across, here and there that still have stuff, about, being, limited for COVID or things like that. That are back from, 2020 and 2021 that they haven't updated. So just make sure your website's up to date. You can add your capabilities statement on there if you'd like. That way they can see it. And if they lose their copy, they'll be able to access it without too much trouble. Make sure your social media pages are active and up to date. So if they are searching, if you're going to put those as links to either in your capability statement or they're just going to search for you, you want to make sure, again, just up to date. Doesn't mean you have to actively be posting. Doesn't mean you have to, have a number of followers. Just make sure they're active, make sure they're up to date, make sure they work. And also, is your Google business profile claimed and or updated? So when you go and search say you're searching for a restaurant and you're going to go, see what time they open, and you get that little box on the right side of Google that shows here's their hours, here's a picture of the place, here's the link to their address. That's your Google business profile. Every business has one. Not every business has claimed theirs. So if you go click that link, you can claim your business, you can update it so that way you have control over the information it's displayed. So you want to make sure that one, it lists that you are open, what your business hours are, what your website is. You can put pictures of the business, whatever it is you want to do, you can do that. It's totally free. And it's, again, when somebody's Googling your name, that's going to be one of the first things that pops up besides your website. So you want to make sure, that you have that, they make sure that you have control over that information. Something a little more advanced that, again, just throwing it out there depending on what you're comfortable with, but you can use QR codes and special URLs, special links to help see what kind of traffic you're getting. So you put out if you put out a capability statement, it just has a link to your regular, your homepage. So it's, company.com. Again, you might get traffic, but you're not going to know, is that traffic coming from my capability statement? So how do you track that? So you can look, I'm going to pull that up here. So you can use, this is a free tool from Google. You don't have to have a Google account to use it. You can put in your, so here we'll use Meet the Buyers as an example. Buyers.com. You can say, okay, so I'm going to say capability statement. Or no, do that here. And we're going to say it's a flyer. So you can put in, I'm just putting in stuff here. So you can put in all different kinds of terms to figure out how you want to track it. And then you'll usually see links like these in emails where you see kind of all this extra garbage at the end of a web address. So that's what's going to help with that is you're going to be able to then, you or your marketing folks, your web folks are going to be able to go into your Google Analytics or, Microsoft Clarity, which is another tool, and be able to see where that traffic's coming from. I can show you that example here. So this is from the Meet the Buyers website itself. So like I can go here and see, for example, LVEDC is one of our committee members. So we can see that they sent out an email and we got traffic from that. So you can actually see, instead of people just coming to the Meet the Buyers website, you can see, hey, are they coming from the specific source? So just another way to see, is your capability statement getting traffic? Again, as these just having different things on here depending on what your comfort level is, but just some options to help you kind of keep track of what's going on with your efforts. Okay, and lastly, and we'll talk about this more in our March session, which will be focused on the Expo Day itself. But building relationships and effective communication. And this is going to be really what's key in order to getting in the door with those opportunities. So go back. There it is. So networking is incredibly important. It's important for regular B2B and B2C sales, but it's especially important with government and with large buyers because sometimes that's the only way you can get in the door, is just making that connection. It's very relationship driven, even though it may not come across that way. It does come across as very transactional, but it is based on relationships. That's how you get in the door. That's how you get connected to the right people. And additionally, these buyers are going to get, they could get thousands of responses and emails and capability statements every day. So you want to make sure that you're standing out. So you can certainly email them, but being able to network and meet them in person is going to do a lot more wonders than than just reaching out by email. Because a lot of times it may be that they want to respond, but they're just beyond overwhelmed with everybody else that's reaching out. It's important to find the decision makers. They may be at the expo, they may not. Sometimes they may send their supplier diversity folks. They may send a buyer for a different category. So, you may be looking to sell cleaning services, but they're looking to buy landscaping services. So you just want to make sure that you're getting connected to the right people that you want to be talking to. Sometimes those people will be at the expo, sometimes they will not. And networking is especially critical for government, particularly if your average sale is under $25,000. Why is that? So the reason for that is, especially at the government, and again, with private sector companies, it's just going to be up to them what they do. But for government, typically under $25,000, they can just issue an invoice. They don't have to it's non-competitive. So they can either pay with a corporate card or with their government purchasing card. They can just issue an invoice or a purchase order, for anything under that. So if your average ticket is under $25,000, networking is even more important because that may be the only way you get on their radar. Because they're just going to go, they're either going to buy from who they bought from before, they're going to do a quick Google search, whatever it is. So you want to make sure that you're on that list. Not that there's an official list, but you want to make sure you're on that person's particular list. Okay. So obviously if it's above that, you're probably going to be more in the proposal category where you're going to submit a formal bid, but even still, just being involved in that, like we talked about with the acquisition process to the question earlier, the earlier you can get in with those folks, the better your chances are going to be. Some places you can find these events. So again, this is not just limited to the Meet the Buyers Expo, even though that is probably the most imminent one that's coming up. SAM.gov does list events under their special notices. It's a little harder to find since they've merged all the websites, but you can do it. The APTAC, which is the Association for Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, of which the Lehigh SBDC is one. They also have some events as well. That's sort of a national calendar you can look at. Every federal agency has an OSDBU website, which is the clunkiest acronym I've ever come across in my life. And what that stands for is the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. So every federal agency is required to have one of these offices, and basically their goal is to connect with small businesses and try and get them doing business with the government. So that can be a way to find out what events they're doing. Those are probably going to be your best options for federal. Looking for prime contractors. So if you go and figure out, hey, who are these entities doing business with that they're giving out the $1 million contracts for, find out who those are, go to their websites, see what opportunities they have. Industry and trade associations. So you may have there might be a defense industry event similar to Meet the Buyers where they're going to have folks there to meet with. It might be industry specific. So if that is your industry, you can go ahead and go. The SBA has an events calendar that you can find both just general training events as well as matchmaking events. The GSA, which is where again you're buying a lot of more. They do have services on there, but it's more product based. They will also have trainings. GSA will also be at the expo, so you can talk to them there. And also locally, either through the chamber, through our event, obviously, regionally, there's going to probably be more of these types of events down towards closer to Philadelphia, closer to New York. But again, there's going to be these types of events all over. It's just figuring out when and where they are. So you can Google business matchmaking events, things like that, find different things. But again, if you're looking specifically to get in with particular agencies or particular businesses, these are some tips on how to do that. So how to maximize your opportunities as you're going through this. Make sure the entity is buying what you sell. One of the things, typically the Meet the Buyers Expo in 2019 and before, it used to be sort of open season. So it would just be, the buyers would be there, people would go meet with them, and it would just, you could just go and talk to whoever you wanted, which again, works. But we got a lot of positive feedback from both buyers and businesses attending that the ability to schedule meetings ahead of time was really helpful and led to more quality meetings. So we're going to post that information as we get it, starting in February. Probably middle of February, we're going to start posting that information up on our website so you can see what it is that they're looking for. But for any event, make sure that the entity is buying what you sell. And again, it doesn't mean that that person specifically has to be buying what you sell, but just make sure the entity does need that product. To answer another question that I have here, everybody sells wildly different things. Everybody needs something. So, there may be, you may not be a federal contract, but for example, if you sell, consumer goods, more, this one's, the question was specifically towards more like, craft type items, more like home good type things. The federal government itself may not be buying it, but for example, there's military exchanges, which are, more or less grocery stores on a military basis. So, you may not be, Department of Justice may not be buying what you sell, but you may be able to get in with those military exchanges as an opportunity to be able to sell to them. Additionally, Like, for example, with co-stars in Pennsylvania, there's going to be local governments and local agencies and local nonprofits that can buy off of co-stars. So again, you may not be selling directly to government, but you may be able to sell those products to those entities. So again, there may not be a huge market for it, but there may be a market. Again, governments and large businesses need the same things you do as a business owner. So you can review. So going back to the slide, tips are you can review entity forecasts. So the private sector is probably not going to have those, but the federal government for sure has forecasts as to what they're planning on buying. These are probably going to be bigger things, but they do put out forecasts. Right. Talking much. You can review historical awards. So you can go in again with the federal government, state government, local government, find out what they've bought in the past. Have they bought your product before? Who have they bought it from? How much were they paying for it? Do they buy it regularly? Did they buy it once? So you can kind of get an idea, was this sort of a one-off thing they did, or is it something maybe they do every couple of years, or is it something that they have a much more frequent need for? Again, just to get an idea of, are they even buying what it is you sell? As we get closer again, once you get in the platform for the expo, you'll be able to see who is attending, so you can research them, get their background, understand, again, as you would do for any sort of sales call, research them just to get some background. If you have certifications, so this is where we're talking about, minority-owned, veteran-owned, woman-owned, and such, advertise those certifications for sure, but make sure, but don't lead with those, in the sense that, the buyers are looking for, why should they do business with you? And again, having that certification can certainly get a foot in the door, can certainly be helpful, but they want to know, why should they do business with you versus who they're currently doing business with. So make sure that you're bringing that up in the conversation, but don't make that the entire conversation. Make it why, what is your value add as a business to that buyer, and on top of it, you also happen to be a woman-owned business. So tailor your elevator speech, focus on the value add, which I just said. Staple your business card to your capability statement. Don't paperclip it, because paperclips come off. Staple it so that way they have both. And again, you want your capability statement to be one page, one-sided, simply because, again, if you put all the important information on the backside, they may never even read it. So again, typically it's only one page, one side. So make sure everything fits on that one page. And also, this may seem obvious, but if a rep, whether at the expo or just anywhere, from a buyer offers contact outside of the event, take it. It may be, you may think it's not worth your time. You may think it's not going to go anywhere. But again, if they're offering you a meeting, if they're offering you a phone call, take it, because there's nothing bad that's going to happen out of it. Nothing bad is going to happen out of it. Again, it may require a little, may even require some travel, but it may be worth it. So again, consider that. It's certainly not a requirement, but and it doesn't mean if they don't offer you a meeting that they're not interested. It certainly doesn't mean that at all. But again, if they're offering you that opportunity, take it. Worst case, you learn something. Best case, you may get an opportunity out of it. Oops. So just some other questions that we typically get. We've gotten the question, do we need more than one capability statement? Typically, no. But if you have very distinct lines of business, for example, say, again, you're a cleaning company, you offer both cleaning services, but you also sell cleaning products. You may want to have two separate capability statements, just because you may not be able to fit enough about both on one page. But typically, no. Typically, most businesses are going to be fine with one capability statement. It should be updated frequently. It's a dynamic document. You want to make sure it's current. You want to make sure the information is up to date. For example, you want to make sure that point of contact still works there. That's always important. That the phone number still works, the email still works, all of that. And again, same thing. Why only one page? There's going to be dozens of capability statements that they get at the expo itself. So the less work you make them have to do, the better. Right? If they have to, if you give them your 20-page sales booklet, it's probably not even going to be looked at. You give them a brochure, they may look at it, but it's not gonna, they want the capability statement. That's what they look for. Okay. So, and again, once you make it once, you have the template, you can update it going forward. Others, in determining what events you should attend, which ones have the most potential return on investment for you. So, look at, don't attend just to attend it. Make sure that there's some connection to your business. A lot of these types, the expo is different in that we get a variety of businesses because we want to attract a variety of people. But some are very industry or business specific. So there may be one that's specific to IT. If you're not an IT business, don't go to that. Even if there's a buyer there that you want to do business with, they may buy your product, but if it's IT focused, that person's not going to know, they're not going to be familiar with what you sell. And also geography. Obviously, if there's one regional event out in California, it's probably not worth it to go. But, if it's down in Philly, it may totally be worth spending half a day to go do it. And again, can you just email the contracting officer? You can. You can also win the Powerball. Both are equally about as likely to result in success. Just because again, they're inundated. They may even be filtering those kinds of things already. Spam filters and everything. It may not even get to them. So being able to meet them is going to do a lot more wonders than just reaching out. All right. And there's another question I'm going to get to, but I just want to put it on this page. If you are interested in attending the expo, this pretty much wraps up today's session. You can go to lvmeetthebuyers.com, get more information. You can register there. If you have specific questions, you can email us at meetthebuyers@lehigh.edu, and we'll get back to you. And the QR code goes right to the Meet the Buyers site, so you can scan that as well.